Oh, hands down, absolutely. People think when people go, well, I interviewed this guy, but he didn't share the show with his audience. And I'm like, you're missing the boat. I
Yep.
go, it's not that person's job. It's not her job to share it. I go, the big takeaway from an interview is the relationship you have with that person. Don't be like, when you interview that person, that shouldn't be the last time you talk to them.
This episode is brought to you by Pintcast Media. If you ever thought about launching a podcast to grow your brand, your clinic, or your business, we can help. Drop me an email, jimmy@ptpintcast.com, or just head to PT Pintcast and we'll get it taken care of. Well, that's what today's episode is about. We're diving deep on the medium of podcasting. Now, imagine launching a show in 2005, before Spotify, before iPhones had podcasts built into them, before most people even knew what a podcast was. Now imagine sticking with it, helping hundreds launch their shows, writing books on podcast monetization, and eventually getting inducted into the Academy of Podcasters Hall of Fame. It's a lot to say on one breath. Today's guest didn't just ride the podcasting wave, he helped create the swell. From being a roadie for 80s rock bands to become the head of podcasting at a major web platform. He spent the last 2 decades helping people use podcasts to grow their influence by keeping it honest, strategic, and profitable. Ladies and gentlemen, meet the one and only Dave Jackson here on PT Pintcast. And just for a refresher, our audience is mainly healthcare providers who are now, either doing and creating their own content. The fun part was, 9 years ago, I was telling everybody, I'm telling you, in a couple of years, you're going to have your own podcast.
Yeah.
People were saying you're crazy. It's just going to be big organizations. And now looks like we're right.
Yeah. And I get so much of my news now from podcasts. And when I watch the news, I'm like, oh, this is why I don't watch this.
Yeah.
My favorite is every December when they go, oh, hey, the red cups are in at Starbucks. It's Christmas time. And I'm like, do you think I don't know that's a commercial?
Thanks for the update.
As a news story? I'm like,
yep.
No. So
well, let's do this. You started podcasting in 2005. That's when I launched my show. What brought you into podcasting, or what's the route that got you here, and then why'd you stay?
Yeah, my background's in teaching, and so it was a case where I was already building websites with Microsoft Front Page and Dreamweaver and all this other stuff. And so I was on the internet. I had a blog, and a friend of mine came back from a big marketing thing and said, I've seen the next big thing. It's podcasting. And I went to Google. I typed in podcasting and 1.5 pages came up. And I was like, yeah, I was like, how do you spell that? He's like, it's POD casting. Like what? And I'm like, dude, I think we broke the internet. There's nothing on this.
Wow.
And so I finally parted one together, took my blog, turned it into a podcast. And within like probably 2 weeks, I got a voicemail from Michael Van Laar from Nuremberg, Germany. And that just blew my brain. I went, okay, I knew this was global, but like it's global. And for me, you can be as creative as you want. Back then you had to be kind of nerdy.
Yeah.
And if you give a teacher a podcast, they're going to want to teach with it. If you give one to a salesman, they're going to want to sell, et cetera, et cetera. And I was just like, oh, this could be this amazing tool. And I just grabbed my flag, the podcasting flag. I claim podcasting in the name of Dave.
Right.
And off we went. So yeah, it was really cool. So that's really what got me, was when I got that first voicemail and I was like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And I need to find it somewhere in one of my very first podcasts. I said, I think podcasting is going to change the world. And that was 20 years ago. And it definitely has.
So here's why I agree and disagree, but mostly agree.
Okay.
It's conversation at scale. It's what we do around a campfire or around a pint of beer, right? I mean, people ask me all the time, like, you have a healthcare podcast, but the image, your graphic is a beer. Mine was started at a professional conference when I watched someone on stage, and I was sort of confused by most of what they were saying because they were presenting, right, as I buttoned up my collar.
Right.
But then in the networking hour, we were just two people talking, and I understood none of the stuff was over my head, but he was presenting it in a way because he had to fulfill the role of a presenter, or he thought. And then I understood everything that person was talking about, or most of it, I should say, in 15 minutes. That 60-minute presentation, I was able to understand in 15 minutes. I remember thinking, gosh, that thing that my IT guy told me about 4 years ago when I was still at a radio station at that point, I'm like, that could be a thing. Because I think it's just simply conversation at scale. So that's why I think podcasting does change the world, but doesn't, because I think the magic has nothing to do with the technology and everything to do with the brilliance on the sending and receiving side, or the brilliance and the wanting to learn. So like a teacher taking it over is very, very obvious now when you look back, right? Very obvious in hindsight.
Yeah, and there's a guy on YouTube has bazillions of followers, and he's spoken in front of Congress. He's so popular about copyright stuff, and he was talking about how he goes, when I watch, Jimmy Fallon or any of the Jimmys late night, he goes, it's oh, I understand you went on vacation, then they come back from the not so entertaining story. Okay, tell us about this clip we're going to watch. Okay, thank you, goodbye. And he goes, so if Sting's on the Tonight Show, great. He goes, but if Sting comes on my show, he goes, I'm going to talk to him for an hour and a half. And he goes, and I know every album, every musician. And he goes, we're going to talk about his music, which is probably what Sting wants to talk about. And he goes, you just can't get that anyplace.
You can't.
And so it's one of those things where it's funny. I went in, because if I watch any of the talk shows now, it's not on TV, it's on YouTube. And it's always like, oh, well, that was kind of boring, because it's the golden nuggets come out. Not that your show has to be an hour and a half long,
It doesn't,
but
right.
It's just the fact that you're talking about the thing that the audience wants to talk about.
Yeah, when people say like, well, don't let me get, before we hit record or in the middle of something, well, I don't want to get too much in the weeds. And I'll stop them and be like, in the weeds is where the fun stuff is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel have the beaten path covered. I'm not going to out Jimmy Fallon or Jimmy Kimmel. I can't do it, right? I don't have that. So that was one thing when I started podcasting, is I came from broadcasting. So I had to sort of unlearn what this medium was. And someone gave it to me the best way. And I'd love your take on it. They said, Jimmy, you need to think about it like narrowcasting. Because now you can have a show. Like if someone came to me when I was running a radio station in Pennsylvania and said, I want to do a half hour each week on your 50,000 watt radio station about garden gnomes, I'd be like, absolutely, as I called security and had them escorted. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense, right? Like it needed to be like less than a half a standard deviation away from what I was doing, which was a rock station. So if you said I wanted to do a local music only station, I'm like, okay, that's sort of, I'll give you like 10 to midnight on Saturdays or something like that, right? But now, number one, you don't need a license or to pay $100,000 a year in music licensing fees, right? You don't need a giant tower, but you can do this narrowcasting where you can do a show about grandparenting or stamp collecting. And the good and bad thing about that, from my perspective, is, well, you can launch it in a day or less. And it's going to be as successful as you want it to be, but the audience is going to decide. That's the fun part, is you are competing with, quite literally, the internet, which is overwhelming and daunting. How do you explain why someone should start if they hear me say that phrase? You are now competing with the internet and everybody's attention. Why is that still okay and still a positive return on investment for your time and effort?
Yeah, because most of the internet's awful, in a nutshell. I'm serious. I have heard so many shows that they haven't thought about, who's my audience, what do they want, what do I want out of this, and it's just, they think all I need to do is talk into a microphone and money will fall from heaven.
Right.
And that's why a large portion of podcasters quit by episode 8, because I've done 70 of these things. I think I'm funny. My co-host thinks I'm hilarious.
Right.
And so they're sitting there and going, man, remember the orange Gatorade? And the other guy goes, orange Gatorade. And the audience is going, what? What are we talking about?
The audience is gone by then.
Yeah.
They're not even asking what anymore.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where I think the guy for me that takes the cake is the Chameleon Breeder podcast. And I go, wait, you breed chameleons? And he goes, yep. And I go, the little lizards that change colors? And he's like, yep. And I go, all right, tell me about that. And he's like, well, I build and sell cages for people that do this. And I'm like, okay, that's amazing. And he goes, well, what's interesting? He goes, I've had my audience tell me that, we can buy those cages cheaper from overseas, but we buy them from you because you've given us so many tips. So it's the law of reciprocity comes into play. And it was funny because when I talked to him, he goes, the manufacturer's kind of like, can you kind of like not so much promoting on the cages because we're having a hard time keeping up. And I go, dude, that is proof of concept. Right. You either get a different manufacturer or you get an additional one. I go, but But yeah, that was one I was like, okay, you win. That's the most niche thing I've ever heard.
What also it puts into context, people. I think the internet screwed us up a little bit, myself included, all the time. I have to
Oh
I
yeah.
have to recalibrate all the time because when you see metrics like a Mark Rober or
Yeah.
people or a Mr. Beast, and you're like, well, if I don't have 10,000, if I don't have 5 figures, or if I don't have 6 figures in terms of followers, then I'm not successful. And then you get the Chameleon Breeder podcast, and you're saying,
Right.
well, what is success? I can redefine what success is. Like, I'll give you an example. I helped a friend start a podcast 2 years ago, and she fell into the same sort of rut that you had just mentioned. She came out of the gate hot with 4 or 5 episodes, and then sort of pod faded, right? And we'll fix the video later.
Okay.
And uh, she said, I'm getting 40 or 50 downloads an episode. And again, her podcast is a niche within a niche within a niche. She's a physical therapist assistant. And she's like, I want to speak to this niche within physical therapy of these PTAs. And she's like, I'm getting 40 to 50 downloads an episode. And I was like, all right, but you've done 8. So imagine you threw like 8 Tupperware parties from scratch and 50 people showed up every time to hang out with you for 45 minutes. Let's do the math on 45 minutes times 50 people. And it took you a half hour. Let's say it took you an hour, half hour to organize, half hour to have the conversation. Is that a positive ROI? And she's like, oh, so I didn't have to zhuzh up the statistics for her. I just put it in different context. And when you start looking at it that way, you can start to say, wow.
Absolutely. And when you say only 50 downloads, again, the old teacher in me says, well, wait a minute, 20 used to be a pretty full classroom.
Right.
So that's 2.5 classrooms. Oh, and by the way, they could be playing Xbox. They could be listening to Sirius Satellite. They could be watching Netflix. Like there's no
Anything in the
spam
world.
in podcasting.
Right.
Like
They gave you, 30 minutes times 50 50 people listening. They could have been, like, as Jay-Z said, you could have been anywhere in the world tonight and you're here with me. Thank you. Out of 168 hours, I'm sleeping a couple hours a night. Those minutes are valuable. I use Blueberry for my host.
Mm-hmm.
And the one statistic I could not wrap my head around until all of a sudden I did was, what do they call it? Like quality listens or quality downloads? Hang on, I'm looking it up right now. And essentially what it is it's, what are they? Oh, impactful plays. And their impactful plays are show listens through at least 75% of an episode. Because if you were to turn to an advertiser, or if you were just looking at it from yourself and you're like, okay, well, they listened, but they listened for 3 seconds.
Right.
Blueberry is able to track, however they're able to track it, that right now, this is the thing I'm more proud of than I am the download numbers. Right now, I've got a 94% impactful play, which means if you had 100 people listen, 94 of them listened to at least the 3/4 mark of the episode. They stuck around for most of it. That's powerful, in my opinion.
Oh, very much so. And that's where I do a show every Saturday and I have it on YouTube. I take the video, strip out the audio, and put it out as a podcast. Because technically, YouTube isn't a podcast. You're a YouTuber, be a YouTuber, have fun. The best completion rate I've had on YouTube is 38%.
Yeah, it's wild.
The worst completion rate I've had on the exact same content on audio is, I think, 72%.
Yeah.
So I'm like, if you want to go a mile wide and an inch deep, YouTube all day long. But if you want to actually have people listen to your stuff, then put it out as audio. And right now, a lot of people are like, but everybody says you need to do video. Like video is the future. And I go, let's peel back the curtain on who everybody is. Right. Oh, let's see. There they are. Oh, and they have a red logo. I believe their name is YouTube.
Right.
And I've done, when I used to work at Libsyn, which is the oldest podcast media hosting company, and Bill Maher was there when he launched Club Random, and he launched it. He only wanted to do video, and we're like, Bill, you probably should do audio too. And so we kind of twisted his arm. We put it out. Bill hired a PR agency to only promote the video. And when the stats came in, the audio still outperformed the video 15-1.
Say that stat again.
When comparing audio to video, the audio outperformed the video 15-1. So for every 1 viewer you had on YouTube, you had 15 on the audio side. And the reason for that is I can't watch your video in the car. I can't watch your video while I'm doing the dishes or walking the dog. There's more opportunities to listen than there are to watch. And it's really just him sitting in a chair interviewing
Right.
some other celebrity. I don't really need to see it.
Right.
And I did the math at how many active podcasts there were, and there was just a study that came out from Edison Research on what the active listenership of, podcasts was, and I compared that to, the best you could find how many active YouTubers there were and the YouTube audience. And again, audio 15 to 1.
Right.
So as much as YouTube is huge, and look, if you want to be on YouTube, by all means, be on YouTube. You'd be dumb not to. It's free, but it's just not, all that in a bag of chips. I have
Right.
an episode coming out with a guy that is doing both, and he said the additional time is not a joke. He goes, because
Right.
you've got all this extra editing and things like that.
Are you still staying late just to finish your notes? Athelis Scribe uses ambient AI to auto-generate documentation, so your notes are done before you leave the room. You want to see how it works? Email me now at jimmy@ptpintcast.com. I'll give you a quick demo.
So
Now, I help people launch podcasts in healthcare. I tell them to do the video for two reasons. Number one, when I started, my podcast looked a lot like this. I mean, I was doing it, there was no video, right?
Right.
I was doing it almost like a phone. I was using apps that it was voice over IP or whatever I was using at the time.
Yeah.
During COVID is when I was able to hook my Rode mixing board to my computer. And all of a sudden I was like, oh gosh, I can get this great microphone sound because I'm a bit of an audio guy. And this, for me, it was eye contact and body language. Like recording the video was nice, but for me, reading the guest and not wondering if they're bored, like all those things. So even if I didn't record it, the visuals were a win. And then with the rise of short form video, if you said rank these in order, number one is still going to be audio in terms of importance and reach. And there's your stat to back it up, 15 to 1. Secondary to me would, even if I just walked away with one or two short form clips to promote that in other mediums, that would be the win. The long form stuff for me is way, way down the list. Probably even after show notes and the SEO for my website, I still think long form, because I'm not adding a whole ton in terms of visual. Like Dave and I are sitting here talking. If you want to watch Dave and I talk, you can go over to YouTube and watch and listen to the same episode. Have fun with that. I don't do it. I do the same thing as everybody else. So I agree. If you can minimize the steps, which I do, then by all means. For me, it's an extra step. But I get that short form content out of there. Do you agree with the short form content being powerful?
Yeah, it's one of those where what it does is it keeps your brand in front of people while you're working on your next episode.
There it is.
And a lot of times I will see that and go, oh, that's a clip. That means there's a new episode. And I will then go to my phone and get the full episode. So yeah, I'm not anti-video. The thing I always hate is when somebody comes up to me and they have this great idea for a podcast. And I'm like, great, let's go. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, what's the holdup? And they're like, I don't want to do video. And I go, so don't do video. And they go, no, but everybody says I need to do video. And I'm like, no, you can just do audio. So that's the big thing that I hate, is when I see somebody with a great idea and they just feel they have to. And I'm like, no, you don't have to. You can always add it later.
Watch out for the trigger words. Always and never. You have to always do this. And I'm like, do I always have to do this? If it doesn't work for me, maybe I shouldn't.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, the people that are listening to our show are typically healthcare providers. Typically, they're geographically based, right? Podcasting can reach overseas like that, can go around the world in half a blink. I've coached, or at least nudged people and said, I think you can have a return on investment for a podcast with 0 downloads. And I want to hear your thought on this. What I've used it as an icebreaker. If you wanted to go and meet a local physician, Dave, what city are you in? I'm in
Akron, Ohio.
So if you wanted to do the Healthy Akron podcast, you start that. And your only job is now find a dietitian, an orthopedic surgeon, a nutritionist, an occupational therapist, speech therapist. And your job is going to go around and highlight them for 20 minutes a pop. Even if no one listens, I've said, you just opened 5 potential doors to your business. Thoughts on that?
Oh, hands down. Absolutely. People think, when people go, well, I interviewed this guy, but he didn't share the show with his audience. And I'm like, you're missing the boat. Yep. I go, it's not that person's job. It's not her job to share it. I go, the big takeaway from an interview is the relationship you have with that person. Don't be like, when you interview that person, that shouldn't be the last time you talk to them.
Correct.
And the other beautiful thing of that is when I first started, my first podcast was for musicians. And I ended up talking to all sorts of people that I grew up idolizing. And
How-
I was just like, you got to be kidding me. Like, there's one guy named Carmine Appice. He's played drums for Rod Stewart and Ozzy Osbourne and all sorts of people. And it turned out that Carmen had just launched some sort of drum school online. So he had something to promote. And I reached out and I'm like, do you want to come on my podcast? Well, this is back in 2005. So of course they said, what's a podcast?
Right.
And I basically interviewed him over the phone because that's what you did back then. But I was like, I can't believe I'm talking to Carmine Appice. I couldn't believe. And then it was, the bass player of Quiet Riot and all these other things. And I was like, I can't believe these people. Whereas if I just said, hey, can I pick your brain about the music business for 20 minutes? They'd be like, get out of here, kid. You bother me. But if I have a podcast, they'll pick up the phone.
How do I put you on a pedestal, right? Like that's what you're
Yeah.
saying, like not a pedestal, but how do I put you on a stage? Somebody framed this for me. Again, I worked in Northeast Pennsylvania. We were Radio Market 68 or something like that. And we had Foo Fighters coming to town.
Nice.
And I was like, of course you call the record rep and you're like, how do I, of course they're going to do a phoner or whatever. And then one of the other program directors who'd been in radio a long time put this in perspective. He said, first of all, Foo Fighters are going to have more fans worldwide than your radio station. It's not even close. 1,000,000 to 1, right? But the smart bands, the Foo Fighters, the ones who understand it, understand that you, a local radio station, have more listeners than there are Foo Fighter fans in that market. And all of a sudden I was like, wait, say that again. Let's say we had 500,000 listeners in Northeast Pennsylvania. Foo Fighters might have 50 million fans worldwide, but out of our 500 listeners in Northeast Pennsylvania, maybe they had 10,000 fans, but they knew they needed to sell 25,000 tickets to sell out the arena. So that's why someone's like, why does it make any sense when Dave Grohl does a phoner with you in Wilkes-Barre? I said, Dave Grohl understands the game he's playing, is that I'm in their ear every day, right? While they're driving home, or I was in their ear every day when they were driving to and from work. He understands that his 15 minutes is going to be packaged and repackaged for the next 2 months to put butts in seats. Now change Northeast Pennsylvania and Dave Grohl, and now you have your musician podcast, or you have, why would that orthopedic surgeon in Akron want to talk to me? I think we're past the tipping point where you need to explain this to most people. Some
Right.
probably, but not most. If you spend a half hour with me, I can repackage that. And now that can be, you're multiplying your time. If that your 30 minutes could now be seen 50 times 30 minutes, that's really powerful.
Oh, it's huge. And I've had people that are my competition call me and said, hey, I've got this thing going on in Cleveland, but they need somebody to come record it. Can you go record it? And I'm like, sure. And I'm like, what do you want? What percentage? He's like, no, just take it. He goes, he's in Oklahoma. He goes, but they need somebody there. And so stuff like that happens all the time. I have a friend of mine that's at novelmarketing.com. And if you're doing anything with books, go see Thomas. And Thomas loves podcasting and he will get you, to a certain extent. But when you need to go into the deep water, he's like, oh, go see my buddy Dave. And I'm the same way. I know a little bit about the book industry, but if you really want to get into, go see Thomas. So it's those relationships that you build that really come into play.
Yeah. So podcast interviews are everywhere. You do them. You listen to a lot. You talk to people about podcasting all the time.
Yeah.
What makes a great one stand out? And what makes one terrible?
First of all, worst opening question ever. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Tell me about yourself.
Because what it is, it reeks of I didn't do any homework and I don't know where to start. And then you've opened up the door for the guest to go, well, I was born in Akron, Ohio. I had a paper route when I was 13.
Yeah, go everywhere.
My dog's name was Butch. It's like, so don't do that. And I just heard a friend of mine, Jordan Harbinger, does a show creatively named The Jordan Harbinger Show. And he's interviewing Kelsey Grammer. And I'm like, how cool is that? Kelsey Grammer. All right. TV's Frasier. And he says, hey, thanks so much for coming on the show. I read your book on the plane. And the first thing Kelsey Grammer said was, thank you very much. Because most people don't. Yep. They love to cheat. Oh, can you send me a PDF so I can send it through Google LM and it can come up with the questions? Like, no, dude, I kind of, I'm getting slightly frustrated with the people that go, well, I want AI to come up with a list of topics, and then I'm going to have AI write the questions, and then I'm going to have AI. I'm like, if you don't want to do a podcast, don't do it. It's like, give me a break. So, but for me, it's what I do with interviews is I come up with what I call my game plan. So these are the questions that I want to ask, and I kind of think of it as like, what would my audience ask if they were in my chair?
Right.
And I try to get them telling stories because those are entertaining. And then I usually have a some sort of notebook in front of me and a pen that doesn't click, and I am listening because the key to a great interview is to listen. So, an example, I had a woman on my show and she said, I knew I had to do something to stand out. And I just wrote down stand out. And then I went back to listening because what happens is you're sitting there going, I got to remember to ask her about standing out. Oh, wait. And then she said this. Now I got to remember to stand out in this thing. Meanwhile, you're still trying to listen. So I'll just write it down and then go back to listening. And that's really one of the keys because a lot of times I will have 5 or 6 questions that I'm going to ask and I get to 3 of them, and then the
That's the
guest
magic.
opens up something. I'm like, oh, this is much more, entertaining than what I had. So that's really the key is great listening and just letting them know. If I have somebody who hasn't been on a podcast before, I let them know this isn't live radio, that if you mess something up, you can fix it. If I ask you a question and you don't want to go in that direction, just say, I don't
Sure.
want to go in that direction. We'll cut it out. So, but yeah, it's the homework really
Yeah.
is a lot of it. And what I try to do is if I'm going to have a guest on is try to listen to a few episodes that they've already done so I can ask questions that haven't been asked. Now everybody has their greatest hits. So you always want to hit those, but I always want to ask some different ones because if the goal is to get them to share this with their audience, it has to be something different because otherwise, it's like asking, Leonard Skinner to share Freebird. They're like, hey,
Right.
our audience has heard that already. You've got to have something a little different. And that's where when you hear an interview that is doing something different, you're like, okay. And my favorite, I just listened to Michael Stelzner talk to somebody about Instagram. And
Okay.
Michael's a great guy. He runs social media marketing world. And as the guy would be talking, I'd be like, yeah, but what does share worthy mean? And the guy would get done talking, and Michael's like, okay, well, for our audience, what does share worthy look like? And
Yes.
he asked every question that I was like, well, wait, that doesn't make sense. So he really understands his audience and asks the question that I would ask if I was in the chair.
Never my I was taught never let your audience yell something at the speaker. Like, why isn't he asking? He just but you didn't follow. How come you didn't? Never
Yeah.
do that, right? Have
Yeah.
the guts to ask that question.
I've been there where I will say something and I'm thinking, well, this will get a follow up question. And you can just tell they've got their list of questions and they're like, great. Uh, what was your aha moment? And you're
Yeah,
like, God.
moving on.
And I'm always tempted to just say something outlandish like, and then I shot a man for snoring. And they go, great. What was your aha moment? And I'm like,
Was
no,
that
no.
Airheads
It
where
was
the
an,
guys he's the typical radio DJ and the guys are saying and he's like, uh-huh, great, okay, great. What happened? Like he's just doing the cliche, not listening, asking,
yeah.
and just saying, uh-huh, keep going. Can I tell you my greatest accidental interview question?
Oh, let's hear it.
And this had a lot of serendipity. I got a chance to do a phoner with Ozzy Osbourne when I was still in radio.
How cool is that?
It was cool, but the 3 days leading up to that, how the hell do you prepare for an interview with Ozzy Osbourne? Because
Yeah.
what hasn't he been asked? What are you going to ask him? So it was both awesome and I'm like, how the hell am I going to do this?
Yeah.
Something happened. Top of the Pops was a TV show from the UK, which essentially someone told me I'd never seen it at that time because this is 10 years, 15 years ago.
Right.
It was like American Bandstand, but for the UK. And as poppy as it was, Ozzy still was on record for a billion years saying, I respect that show. It got me my start. So he sort of idolized that show. One day before my interview, Top of the Pops did a press release saying they were going off the air after 60 years, whatever, how long they'd been on. This was the
wow.
last season.
Yeah.
So I had 5 or 6 questions for Ozzy. He was promoting Ozfest. I mean, it was his fest. He had something to promote. He's going to do a phoner with a random guy in Wilkes-Barre, right? So I said, my first question, luckily it was my first one. And of course, on a radio tour, you get 15 minutes before they pull the plug.
Right.
I said, Ozzy, after, I set up the question, you've been instrumental in, promoting Top of the Pops, saying it helped launch your career. What's your reaction hearing them go off the air after 58 years? And you could hear him pause. Like you could hear the Ozzy wheels grinding.
Right.
And he turns to his manager and they go, hey, Mike, Top of the Pops. And I realized he didn't know.
Oh.
I broke the story to Ozzy. And I remember thinking this is going to go great or horribly. Now it went great. I asked one question, and then I was smart enough to shut the hell up and
Bingo.
let him go off.
Yeah,
Which is
one of my favorite examples is Howard Stern was talking to Ben Affleck about a movie he did where he played this kind of alcoholic father and there's this little kid. And there was a time when Ben Affleck was the little kid and his dad was an alcoholic, and we all know that Ben has struggled with alcohol. And Howard asked him the super personal question: was there ever a time when you just wanted to look at your dad and go, dude, can't you just stay sober for a little bit? And what's beautiful is he did exactly what you said. He shut up, and Ben was in his chair, and he's kind of like, well, it's, and I timed it. There's 18 seconds of silence.
wow.
And when he finally came up with an answer, it was brilliant. He was explaining how his dad had alcohol problems, his grandfather had alcohol problems, and blah. And it was just like, but it's awkward, and it's physically. You see him kind of squirming in his chair, trying to figure out what can I say here that's not going to ruin my career or whatever. And I was like, there's so many times when I see people go, well, what did it feel like when you did that? And then there's this awkward pause, and they turn it into multiple choice. Were you happy? Were you angry? And I'm like, no, just shut up and let them answer the question. You can always edit out the space if you want to later.
Right.
But yeah, that's beautiful, man. Ask the question and shut up.
Well, I mean, I got a chance to interview for K-Rock in 2000. That's where Howard Stern was based out of.
Yeah.
And I did that because, number one, who would say no to an internship there? But what I noticed was that Stern sort of has like a bell curved career where in the first half, he wanted to shock the hell out of you. He wanted to ask the most awkward questions. And that's why people tuned in, because they're like, he was the watch till the end short form video, right? Watch till the end. It's going to be something crazy. And then he said, I think it was that Robin Williams interview where he like really he said that was the one I regret the most was like pushing Robin Williams to get a rise out of him. And now you hear Howard's been going through therapy and open about it, right? His life has been lived on air. Now he goes more for the thing that you just said about Affleck, which is like, I'm going to have a real conversation with a human being, and I want to boil it down to the carbon, oxygen, nitrogen. I want to boil it down to the emotion of the question. I'm not just going to ask him about, oh, you got cheated on, man, that sucked, or how hot was your last, ex-wife, or we saw you online, you got hooked. He went for a real emotion, and he's not doing it to get a shock anymore. He really is trying to let someone like Ben Affleck in that situation give a real answer, and that's a big change.
Yeah, it's funny because he's been this close to retiring forever. So he's on the air less and less and less. And I remember I think it was last summer, he was going to be gone for like a month and a half. And they said, but we're going to run his best interviews. And I was kind of like, oh, I just signed up. I was a big fan when he was on terrestrial regular radio. And I was like, but his interviews were amazing to the point that when he came back, I was like, can we go back to the interviews? Because he was, doing all his shtick with his guys in his squad and everything like that. But yeah, he's a really good interviewer.
Well, I took a note here, Dave, which is something that I was taught that you mentioned, which is what not to do and what to do and how to do it, which is what you shouldn't do. I mean, you can do anything you want, but what I typically tell people not to do is what you mentioned. Hey, tell us about yourself, or, what's your background? Or the host reading a 3-sentence bio. To me, they're sort of one and the same. They're both equally awful. And you mentioned a great way to do it with Jordan Harbinger. Instead of saying, Kelsey Grammer's a Emmy award winner, he hosted it, he's on Cheers and Frasier, and he has a new book out. He was able to take those little bits of information that he wants to sprinkle, if you didn't know who Frasier was or needed a reminder, and bring them along in every question. Kelsey, you just read, after 30-something, 50 years and whatever, you wrote a book and I read it, right? So, he wrote a book. I was able to mention that, but put it as part of the question. That is simple, but really powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just interviewed Tracy Johnson, who was in radio forever, wrote a book. I think it's Mic Drop Moments. And I looked at his bio and I told him before we hit record, I said, okay, this is going to sound weird, but my audience knows what it means. I go, I'm going to call you a big shot smarty pants. I go, because if I read your bio, that's going to be half of our interview. I go, because you've been in radio forever.
Right.
I said, so please don't find that offensive. And I just said, hey, today on the show, he's been in radio forever. In fact, he's a big shot smarty pants. The reason he's here today is because he wrote a book. I read the book. It's really good. It's called Mic Drop Moments. And, Tracy, thanks for coming on the show. And then you just get right into it, because I'm with you. The one that just it's almost a tie. Which is worst? Tell me a little bit about yourself, or let me read your entire
Right.
LinkedIn bio in a monotone voice.
Right.
It's nails on a chalkboard, where I always ask the people, like, why are you excited this person is on your
Right.
show? Like, that's really all the audience cares. And I get it. I think the podcaster thinks, well, I have to explain why this person is on my show. And I'm like, no, not really, because they trust you and they assume you're not going to bring somebody on that's going to be boring. So all you have to do is explain why they're here. Like, why did you bring them on? And so the person I talked about before that said, I know I have something to stand out. She could have talked about work-life balance. She was a musician. She'd had 2 major record labels that had, she'd gotten on the label and then got dropped and this and that. And I said, but the reason she's here today is she does exactly what I advise people to do, which is to make content that your audience wants. And so she's now making money as a musician by writing music that works really good in Netflix documentaries and, all the licensing stuff. So it was what I always say, like, hey, make what your audience wants. But we could have gone a billion different
Right.
ways. But I was like, this is why we're here. And I also kind of said that for her to kind of go, this is the lane we're going to stay in, because we could
Right.
go all sorts of places
Right.
with her.
But what you're really doing too is you're saying you're giving the audience enough reason to stick around for the next question. Right? You're
Right.
saying it's a setup and punchline. As much as we want to, I might want to mock reality TV, but last time on Naked and Afraid, it's can I give you? I'm going to catch you up real quick on this person's whole life.
Right.
The reason they're here today is this, and I need to give you enough to have you stick around for 5 more minutes. And then the next checkpoint should be, let me give you enough for 5 more minutes. And what you're doing is you're building a relationship. And when you just vomit everything, that's more of a transaction. Here's
Yeah.
why I need you to give me 30 seconds to stick around, versus building a relationship. And when you do that over time, question to question, episode to episode, season to season, that's building an audience, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And so when you do interviews, you grow your network, which is beautiful. And I have people go, well, should I do an interview show or should I do a solo show? And I'm like, why limit yourself? Do both.
Do both.
Because
Sure.
when you do a solo show, and some people find that really weird. I don't. I've never had a problem. I just picture my audience. That's Ken
Yeah.
Blanchard. It's Kim Craggy sitting across the desk, and I'm really excited to tell them about something. And when you do a solo show and none of this YouTube stuff where you're like, hey guys, it's like, no, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm so glad you're here. I talked to one
One
person,
person.
and that grows your influence. So solo shows grow your influence, network shows grow your network, or network show interview shows grow your network.
Whether you're a solo PT or running multiple clinics, Empower EMR grows with you. It's flexible, cloud-based, and actually easy to use. See it in action at empoweremr.com. Agreed. All right, so talking right to this one person that we're talking to now, we're envisioning this third person in the room outside of Dave and I, somebody who's in healthcare who wants to start a podcast. What would you suggest their first 30 days look like? What should they do to say, I want to launch on July 1st as we record this? How would you make it so it's digestible, not overwhelming, that they're going to be able to launch and keep it up? What do you typically tell people?
Yeah, well, there are a couple questions you have to answer. Number one is, why are you doing it? Because if you don't get your why, then you'll burn out. Who is it for, and what do they need? And when I say who, I don't mean everybody. Like, because even if you go, oh, it's for females 25 to 55. Like, there's a big difference between a 25-year-old female and a 55-year-old female. So you have to be a little specific. And then the hard part is, what can I talk about that's going to entertain or educate the who, while moving them towards my why? That's the part that's kind of tough to figure out. And then from there, it's just a matter of, okay, what is the format? Are they all going to be solo? Is it going to be me and a co-host? Because then you have to figure out what's the equipment to buy, and you don't have to
Sure.
spend a gazillion dollars. You can get started with $100 microphone and you're off to the races. And then you can use tools like Riverside or just Script. There's all sorts of software to use, but it's and just when you first look at it, it's kind of interesting. When I go to conferences about podcasting, by day 2, the the adjective I hear over and over and over is, oh man, I'm so overwhelmed. And I'm like, I get that. You're being fed with a fire hose. That's what
Right.
events do. I'm like, just take it piece by piece. And like everything else, um, when you come up with that first question. So for me, if I'm ever dealing with a business owner, I go, what are those questions that you just go, oh, if I have to answer that again? Like those, number one, people are going to ask it. So those are your first couple of episodes, all those. And that way, when somebody asks you, like for me, it's like, what's the best microphone under $100? I'm like, the Samson Q2U. But if somebody asks me that, I can send them now. I can still answer the question. I don't want to be rude, but I can say, oh, I talked about that in episode 2 of the podcast. Just go to blah, blah, blah. And then while they're there, they're like, oh, there's the question I asked. And here's another one I was going to ask. And here's another one. And so I had a client of mine that was in real estate. And he said, wow, this is interesting. He goes, it's not the end of cold calls. He goes, but I definitely get a lot less because of that exact thing. His first like 10 episodes were all the questions that he just like, if I have to answer that again, how do I get my house appraised? So he had all those there, and he goes, and what's great about it is then when people did come to him, it wasn't kind of the 101 stuff, and it was things that he really needed to help them with. So he was having a more efficient use of his time. But just take it step by step. And the thing I always scratch my head on is somebody will go, they'll put out their first episode and make it public, and then ask everybody to come listen to it and give them feedback. And I go, I don't know too many restaurants that open up and go, here, everybody eat our food and let us know if it's good. You want to get the feedback before you open, and just realize that even doing that, your first episode isn't going to be as good as your 10th. And that's just the way it works. And shooting baskets and driving and everything and tying your shoes, but just take it step by step. It's really not that hard. I have so many people like, oh, me and technology don't get along. And I'm like, okay, so if you're in the car and your jam comes on, what do you do? And like, oh, crank up the radio. Great. I go, and then the phone rings. What do you do? And they go, well, I turn down the radio and, if I can, I'll answer the phone. I'm like, oh, you know how to mix audio. And they're like, okay. And I'm like, have you ever uploaded or have you ever, attached a Word document to an email? And they're like, yep. I go, then you can upload an MP3 file to a media host. I'm like, it's not that there's no learning curve, but because it's new, we think it's super duper crazy technology. And I'm like, no, it's easier and easier every year.
Well, there is one part of this process that I consider myself pretty audio savvy. I've gotten video savvy. I've gotten, all the other steps savvy. But this part pissed me off so much that I was willing to say, if someone has figured it out, take my money. This is how we met, was through Podpage. Like it was somebody built my website for me when I launched my podcast because they told me I had to, right? This is back 9.5 years.
Right.
And now I think people understand, or I don't think you need to really go deep into explaining why a podcast or why a business or why something needs to have a page. But when you hit a point when you do, how do you explain what Podpage does, and who does it help?
Yeah, we make websites for pretty websites for people that don't want to learn how to code.
That's me.
Yeah, and so what we do is whoever your media host is, you give us this thing called your feed, which has all the information about all your episodes. And we import your episodes and we build a page for each one. And then you're like, okay, but I'm trying to grow my email list. Great. Doesn't matter if you're on MailChimp or MailerLite or ConvertKit, just copy and paste. So that's about as technical as you're going to get. Copy and paste the code from ConvertKit into Podpage. There you go. Now you're collecting email addresses. Okay, but I'm also on YouTube. Great. Give us a link to your channel. Okay, now we'll import your videos. We don't want to be a media host because there's already Buzzsprout and Captivate and everybody else. We don't want to be MailChimp because there's already a MailChimp. So what we do is we just integrate with everything and pull it into your website. And the founder, Brendan Mulligan, actually hired me back in 2020 as a consultant and said, hey, I have this idea. Do you think it's a good one? And I was like, well, we're going to need our about page, our contact page, and a way to get our episodes in. And he came back in about a week and said, like this? And I was like, whoa, that is cool. And he's like, what else do you need it to do? And I'm like, I don't know, integrate with PayPal and maybe Patreon. He came back in a couple of days like this. And so he built Podpage the same way I recommend people build a podcast, which is find out what your audience want and then give it to them.
Yep.
And so over the years, they've just added more and more stuff. And it's funny because I worked at Libsyn previous to working here, and I was singing the praises of Podpage for 4 years. And then last year, I came on staff and he said, the biggest problem of hiring you. And I go, what? He goes, nobody's going to believe you now when you say how great Podpage is. They're
Yep.
just going to go, oh, because you work there.
Yep.
And I go, well, I have, clips of me from 4 years ago saying, you got to check this out.
Yeah.
But yeah, it really is a game changer. And I see people that say things like, well, I just send people to my link tree.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you do realize it has zero SEO,
Yeah.
or they just don't have a website. I had a guy that was a podcast consultant. I'm like, oh, great. Where should I send people? And he's like, we don't really, you could maybe my Instagram. And I go, you don't have a website? And he goes, no, we do all of our works kind of from referrals. And I'm like, well, that's impressive. And I just thought in my head, and just think how much more you would have if you had a way to share your stuff.
It's an authority thing, right? Like you could tell, like, again, now at the point where everybody and their mom has a podcast, I get to now say, this is what I am. Look how clean this is. Like that for me, like if you look up ptpintcast.com now, it was okay, but it wasn't dynamic. That was the thing. I had to update every single show, which is another 2 or 3 steps, which doesn't sound like a lot, but 1,500 episodes in, it is a lot. Now this thing auto uploads. So I do the upload of the audio and now Podpage takes care of the rest. I'd love to be able to put up the reviews, but Podpage just goes and finds it for me, right? Yeah. I'd love to be able to say, go subscribe on these platforms. It's all in one. So it has just enough that you need and it looks slick.
Yeah. One of my favorite features is we make a bunch of pages for you. And most people don't realize this. If you say, find me wherever you find your podcast, search in Spotify and Apple is not great.
It's not.
And I had one, I think it was Home Repair Pros. And I typed in Home Repair Pros. That's the guy's name of his show. Didn't come up. Mark Maron, all sorts of weird stuff came up, but not Home Repair Pros. I put in the, podcaster's name, came right up. And I'm like, this is why you don't say, find me wherever you find podcasts. Right. Instead, you go find it. And then you take that link and you put it into Podpage. And now if you go to whatever your website is /follow, there are the follow buttons. Right. And what that does is it reinforces your brand. You're saying your website again. And then you're making it easy for the audience to pick whatever format they want. So same thing with /voicemail, /contact, /survey if you're running a survey, all sorts of stuff. But yeah, we try to make it as easy for the listener and the podcaster while always reinforcing your brand.
It's too easy. I think it took us, and I had a complicated problem. I had a complicated setup, I think, with you and I, because I had an issue with my last page, but it took us maybe 20 minutes to go, okay, undo this, click, 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 done. Within 24 hours, it was uploaded. So if you want that link, reach out to me, Jimmy at ptpintcast.com. I'll let you know how to get hooked up with Dave and Podpage. Dave, last thing we do on an episode, it's called the parting shot. What would you want to leave as your mic drop moment, your soapbox statement for healthcare providers who are like, okay, I'm on the end of a diving board. Maybe I'll jump into this big ocean of podcasting. What would you tell them?
I would say so many people have imposter syndrome. They are convinced that nobody will listen to them. And my favorite example of that is Garth Brooks has locked himself into a hotel in New York City where they've already given him the key to the city. And he's like the best-selling country artist of the year, et cetera, et cetera. But he's convinced that nobody's going to come watch him play in Central Park. And he's got the curtains, like he doesn't want to know. And so finally his tour manager comes in and goes, Garth, they had to move the barricades. He's like, nobody's coming, are they? And he's like, no, Garth, there's 850,000 people out there. And he's like, wait, what? You're telling me there's 850,000 people out there? And he goes, no, Garth, I'm saying there was 850,000 people out there 20 minutes ago. And so by the time the concert went, it was almost 1 million people. And so many people are convinced nobody's going to listen to me. And I'm like, why not? What's wrong with you? And everybody thinks, well, I don't have a radio voice, and I know Todd Cochran is a guy that's in the Podcaster Hall of Fame. Todd sounds like this. Hey, what's going on? Like, not a deep radio voice guy. Dr. Dave kind of sounds like this. Shrink wrap radio. What's going on? And that's the beauty of it. When I hear Dr. Dave, I go, hey, that's Dr. Dave, because nobody else sounds like this. So you don't have to have a big radio voice. And the joke I always say is you will either A, have a great podcast that impacts your life and the life of your audience, or B, you'll have this great story about the time you tried to start a podcast. Either one is a great way to go.
Love it. Dave, appreciate the time, man. Thanks for maybe giving a few people listening a nudge to jump off that diving board and start sharing their brilliance in the world of healthcare.
Thank you so much.
Like what you heard? Great. Subscribe to the show on Apple or Spotify. You can watch the episodes on YouTube. Or don't. I'm not your boss. You want to specialize in ortho, neuro, or sports physical therapy and actually get paid while doing it? Brooks IHL offers accredited residencies and fellowships with full salary, full benefits, and real mentorship from clinical experts. Learn more and apply at brooksihl.org. There aren't nearly enough podcasts in this world. Said no one. Why not launch one more? If you thought about launching a show but don't quite know how, we can help you do all that back-end stuff. Email me at jimmy@ptpintcast.com, and we can add one more podcast no one else will listen to the pile.